So someone recently asked me my opinion on whether or not we can be healthy but also be overweight. And I choose not to take a stance on this topic because it gets extremely emotional and it's hard to have a rational discussion. However, I think there is some pretty cool information to consider when we're trying to figure out at what body weight does excess body mass begin to become unhealthy. And this is referred to as the personal fat threshold. Now, I didn't come up with this idea or this notion. I actually credit someone named Dr. Nadir Alai for really bringing this to my attention. And this personal fat threshold is actually everyone's individual fat mass at which the excess body fat begins to have poor health ramifications. And typically when we surpass this threshold, it's when we begin to get some of the negative diseases that are correlated with obesity, such as type 2 diabetes. With that being said, when we stay below this threshold, it does appear that we can be quite healthy even in a bit larger of a body. So fat cells can go through two different processes, hyperplasia and hypertrophy. As kids, we actually go through a lot of fat cell hyperplasia. And hyperplasia is actually when one fat cell becomes two fat cells. But as we grow older, we kind of maximize our ability to go through hyperplasia and begin to go through fat cell hypertrophy. And hypertrophy is taking the same fat cell and increasing its size. Now, it does appear that fat cell hyperplasia actually is a lot healthier than fat cell hypertrophy. You see, when fat cells continue to hypertrophy, they begin to develop a slight degree of insulin resistance. And insulin resistance isn't actually a medical term, it's kind of just a spectrum to describe the cell's receptivity to the hormone called insulin. So insulin is a hormone that binds to a receptor on a cell. Specifically in the fat cell, it will bind to a receptor and allow that fat cell to actually uptake fatty acids and glucose. But insulin doesn't actually enter the cell. When it binds to the receptor, it causes a bunch of different proteins inside of the cell to start activating. And when they are activated, they cause this process of an increased uptake of fat and glucose. And it also allows for the uptake of amino acids. However, when we begin to hypertrophy these fat cells, they begin to fill up with so much fat and glucose that these molecules actually begin to inhibit some of those proteins responsible for insulin signaling. You see, insulin is extremely important for proper functioning of almost every cell. It's even important inside of the brain. So important that insulin seems to be made inside of the brain, meaning that our blood insulin levels only have a very small impact on our brain insulin. And a lot of the health ramifications that come along with being overweight occur because we begin to lose insulin sensitivity. And when we come back to the personal fat threshold, the reason that it is personal and individual dependent is because different individuals have more or less fat cell hyperplasia. The more hyperplasia we can go through, the easier it is to stop this process of the cell getting, for lack of a better word, overstuffed. But the less hyperplasia we can go through, the quicker these fat cells will begin to become overstuffed and our bodily cells will begin to become insulin resistant. For example, it appears that the personal fat threshold of Indian men and women seems to be lower than those people from European descent, meaning that Indian men and women seem to get diabetes at much lower body weights. But we can see European men and women that are technically classified as being overweight, but they don't necessarily show any of the signs of adverse blood markers or even pre-diabetes. And obviously there are many reasons why this can occur, but I really do believe that one of the reasons is because they have a greater ability to go through fat cell hyperplasia. So their cells simply don't become insulin resistant as quickly. And once again, neither insulin resistance or the personal fat threshold is a medical term. These are simply just frameworks to describe different processes that occur inside the body. And personally, I think the very best way to actually test for your sensitivity to insulin and the likelihood that your body weight is either healthy or unhealthy is going to be to get a blood panel with fasted insulin. If your insulin is within the normal range, this means that your body isn't overproducing the hormone because you are quite sensitive to insulin. But let's say that your fasting insulin is very high. This is an indication that your body actually has to produce a lot of insulin in order to keep your blood glucose stable because the cells simply are not sensitive or receptive to the insulin. And what the cells lack in insulin sensitivity, the pancreas will make up for simply by the sheer volume of insulin in circulation. It's kind of like someone who has perfect hearing could get a message from one person. But when you begin to lose your hearing, it may take 2, 3, or even 100 people to yell as loud as they can in order to get the volume high enough for you to receive the message. So yes, technically this does mean that there is genetic susceptibility to developing things like diabetes and some of the negative health outcomes of being overweight. But this does not mean whatsoever that what we eat has nothing to do with it. When we maintain a healthy body weight, the likelihood that we even get close to our personal fat threshold is extremely low. I think one thing that's extremely important is that when we first begin to build muscle, there does appear to be a significant amount of hyperplasia. And muscles certainly are a storage for, yes, a little bit of fat, but also glucose, meaning we'll store just a little bit less inside of fat cells. So one great recommendation, in addition to trying your best to maintain a healthy body weight, is making sure you're getting your fair share of resistance training in order to build healthy muscle. With that being said, I just hope you found this interesting and maybe take something away from it. And maybe you left this video with a different perspective than when you came in.